It's so good to hear the European perspective, and especially when the Commissioner points out how important the role of the digital finance industry is for all the goals the EU has set, including the European Green Deal. Well, the good thing is we have a lot of players from the digital finance sector here with us, online albeit, but they're here in order to share with us their perspective. So Europe sets out with an ambitious plan to further its global position with regards to fintechs and financial service. But what actually are the prospects for Europe from a global perspective? And that is basically the topic of the first panel, a Digital Europe Seizing the Opportunity panel, by the way, hosted by Visa. And you already see all the panelists. Sort of wanted to give you a really long introduction into the topic, but now that we see the panelists already, I want to be polite and actually say and share with you who they are. So we have here with us Axel Schell. He is CTO Allianz Germany and Allianz Technology, and in both roles, Axel contributes to the digital transformation of Allianz. He's committed to establishing a tech culture, also promotes a tech craftsmanship and an agile way of working at Allianz. Maybe he will tell us a little bit about that. In addition to his profession at Allianz, he's a member of the Digital Advisory Board for Deutsche Sporthilfe and a sponsor of the Digital Leadership Academy, a program designed to bring digitalization closer to students, which I'm sure is a good thing now that we know that the future of finance is digital, so the more the merrier. We also welcome Albrecht Kiel. He's a regional managing director, Central Europe for Visa. So basically the partner of this panel. He's in charge of the business strategies in Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Belgium, the Netherlands and Luxembourg. We say hello to Donald Lacey. He's Chief Investment Officer, Ping An Global Voyager. There he is basically... Well, Ping An, that if you're not familiar with Ping An Global Voyager, that is a growth stage fintech and health tech venture fund formed by the Ping An Group. And Donald Lacey there joined that group, where he worked as a managing director in a variety of corporate and investment banking roles across Asia Pacific. So there we get certainly the view from outside onto Europe. And last but not least, the only woman on the panel, so that makes me feel good. I'm not lonely anymore here. Aiga Senfteleben, she's the co-founder of Billy. That's a Berlin-based breakthrough fintech startup that aims to upgrade the operation system of B2B payments. Aiga is a trained solicitor, and before funding Billy, she gained experience in the fintech and payment sector through working as general counsel of Funding Circle Europe, as well as legal counsel for PayPal. So good to have you all on board, and to all our viewers, if you want to know more about them, as I mentioned, on the dashboard, click on speaker, you get the whole biography and more. But for now, do stay with us, because we now, I'm sure, will learn an awful lot about the potential of European fintechs on a global scale. Let's start with a very, very short round, because we're still in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic. Things are getting better in some parts of the world. They're still very bad in other parts of the world. From your perspective, how have the events of COVID-19 impacted financial services? And with a positive spin, perhaps, what trends do you believe are here to stay? And why don't we start with Aiga?
Hi, first of all, thank you for inviting me to this panel. It's really quite excited to speak at this conference, hopefully next year all in person. Like what have we learned from the pandemic? I do think a lot of small businesses have realized that they need to digitalize their workflows, their cloud computing, right? Like we all had to kind of go like this into home office, and for some companies it was very easy, and for some other companies with like paper-based approval flows and workflows, this is very hard. This is something that we definitely saw. I think we also saw that we really lack in using the data infrastructure that we have. I'm just thinking about the Corona aid programs, where we saw so much fraud in Germany. And I think if we had used the infrastructure that is existent, being through open banking, but also kind of like the transparency registries, we could have avoided a lot of these things and could have made things much, much smoother for the government who's actually now is liable for this. And this is very important for governments to stay credible in a pandemic when they give up aid programs. And I think also, I mean, entirely, I think we have really seen digitization in the future, be it also with digital payments, right? Like in Berlin 2 years ago, you could pay nowhere with the credit card. I think this has shifted massively. It's very normal to have acquiring systems and card acceptance. So I think there we see a great shift that everybody realizes this is something that we need to tackle in the next year.
Exactly, not waiting until something bad happens, but actually be prepared and hopefully be ahead. You just mentioned credit card use. I mean, I sort of remember that I used the credit card sort of a few years ago in Berlin as well. But you're absolutely right. It's a huge difference now. It's contactless payment that really sort of happened now in small retail shops everywhere. And I'm sure Albrecht, you will have a good experience with that now. What was your the kind of impact that COVID-19 had on your business?
Yeah, as Elga said and Monica, really COVID-19 has accelerated digitization and digital payments massively. We say developments which we have reckoned with in years to happened in weeks and months. So you mentioned contactless. We have now 80% of contactless payments in Europe. In Germany, in the last 2 years, contactless payments have increased by 155%, and mobile payments have increased comparably. So we have supported 800 mobile wallet programs in Europe, and they all are picking up massively. But also the online payment in general. So a lot of small and medium enterprises have increased their online capabilities. We saw 40% increase in e-com, so really a transformational shift.
And we all know the name of one big company that really benefited from it, but they're not part of this panel, so we're not dropping names here. I'd be interested to hear, though, from Alex, how this pandemic, did it show in any way in the insurance sector?
Yes, it did. It also changed a bit customer behavior. But I think what my conclusion, my thesis would be is that actually the pandemic didn't change anything fundamentally. It just made things move a lot faster. So what we went through is just a couple of years of progress in a very short time frame. And if you look at certain things like the trends, I think they will not go away. We just have accelerated them. Like look at the home office discussion, look at topics like less travel, more calls, focus on the physical and mental well-being. All of these things have been accelerated. And we also see where technology has its limits. If you just recap how working from home has been in the past month, and we just had a pre-discussion here on the panel before we came here. We were working from home. It's a very transactional, relatively stupid way of working. I mean, we have video conference after video conference, and if you look at pretty cool technology that would put you maybe in a room together with other participants, that the person who is actually at home has a totally different view than the person who's sitting in the office, we still lack that kind of technology that you have this immersive feeling being together. And that will be a key differentiator in the future. If some people work from home, some in the office, how can you make sure that everybody has an equal kind of voting right or equal participation in those meetings? This is something that we are thinking a lot about.
Right. So that would take us to the Star Trek realm, the sort of the holodeck where we all meet without actually being there. I think as actually in the entertainment industry, there are already the first steps going in that direction. But before we sort of drift off, Don, I know in the US and certainly in Asia, digital finance, contactless payment and all of that is, they've done that, it seems, forever. I mean, has anything changed, noticeably changed in the last year there?
Yes, there are things that have changed in Asia and the United States over the course of the last year. I should say thank you for having us. I'm really excited to be a part of the panel, so excited to be here. I think that I'd echo a lot of the comments of my fellow panelists. I think that what we have seen is not so much an unimaginable shift, but rather an acceleration in a lot of underlying trends. At the fund where I work as chief investment officer, we invest in both fintech and among legacy banks and insurance companies in Asia and in the United States. I think digitization of workflows has gone from being a nice to have science project on the side to something that is absolutely essential and top of mind for C-level executives. So that represents the kind of acceleration that I think you heard Axel talk about. On the other side, we invest in digital health, and many of the things that we thought were going to happen, for instance, the embrace of telemedicine at scale. These are things that we imagined always that this would be a 5-year voyage or a 7-year voyage, and instead it's just happened on a dramatically accelerated timetable. So I think Eiga, Albrecht, and Axel really have it right. What we're seeing is an acceleration, not an acceleration more than anything else.
But it's sort of different speed, isn't it? Or at least different starting point, because certainly Asia was already further. I would like to stay with you actually, Don, there, because you could give us a really good comparison in what way the European ecosystem differs from the one in Asia, and which ones do you prefer to cooperate with?
What a good question. I guess we all know, when you look at the rankings of the world's largest technology companies, and people do rankings by different metrics. Market cap is a popular one. It's hard not to look. It's hard to look at those rankings and not to think that Europe is maybe a little behind the United States and Asia. And when I say Asia, I mostly mean China. It does feel like a lot of the core infrastructure advances that underpin a lot of what we do in fintech and in digital health, they seem to derive from the US or China. And you can look no further than the large cloud computing platforms, which are generally exclusively American or Chinese. So you can tell a couple of different stories. I could tell a couple of different stories about Europe. The story a story you could tell is a story about the embedded advantages of being a first mover and the economies of scale in a capital intensive set of industries, and the advantages that provides incumbents in the United States and in China at the expense of Europe. You could tell that story. I guess a counterpoint to that story is that when you look at the success of fintech and digital health businesses that started in the United States or in China, and you look at the relative success of those businesses in penetrating into Europe, it's not been an overwhelming success. And it feels like there are kind of areas of localization, areas of local regulation that are not always appreciated by foreigners, be those Western or Asian foreigners who are trying to address the European market. So it does feel like there is room for very large and very successful European fintech and digital health players to emerge. We're already seeing that. I mean, we can name names of very successful European fintechs and European digital health businesses. I guess.
So we're not a lost case yet.
I'm sorry, what's that?
We're not a lost case yet, because Europeans themselves, we sort of look at ourselves very skeptically too, and thinking, oh, lagging behind here and there. Listening to you makes me feel actually quite good about being European.
I think there's absolutely reason for optimism. I think the one a point of something that I guess I would say though is that in respect of the fintech and digital health companies that we talk to, and Eiga is going to have her own view on this. It feels very hard to point to successful pan-European businesses that are newer. It feels much easier to point to a successful German company or a successful Swedish company or a successful French company or Italian company, but the kind of concept of being able to address a very attractive pan-European market that feels like a stumbling block. So that's one thing that I notice as a venture investor.
All right. Well, actually, that you bring something up here, and I would like to throw a question to the other three. Is that actually important? Whether you are viewed as a German company or as a European service provider, is there a difference in the way it's perceived and how it actually works out in terms of cooperation? Any of you? Perhaps? Aiga, please.
Yeah, I think, Donald, that this was a very good point you had there. I agree. Do we have pan-European champions in the fintech area? Not really. And why is this? I think it's because the very, very scattered regulation that we still have, despite all the efforts to harmonize the regulations, we still have this. And to the other question, is it important to have a big European company versus just a German one? I do think it's very important to have this, to become really like a true competitor to Chinese and American companies. We need to have European champions that provide services that are regulated under good European regulation to citizens in Europe. I do think that's very, very important. And we have very little, if you, for example, look at the entire social media platforms, right? Like this is something that is pretty much owned by the US and China, and users just leave European regulations when they use that, and they're often like 13 on top of that is like regulated by Chinese law. So I do think it's very important to foster European champions, and this either be in areas like social media where you just need to have more funding, and to have VCs encourage them to see, look, this is a business that takes a long time to grow and actually make profit, or in the fintech area where you have to enable for German players to easily go across Europe and see themselves and act as fully European players.
Okay. From the competitive aspect, and I get it that it certainly would be helpful to have a, if you like, European identity and European champions. There's also, of course, the aspect of cooperation, and Allianz certainly is extremely familiar with cooperation. It's in their DNA, if you like, as a global insurer, to cooperate with different players. Axel, what's the future potential that you see to deepen this?
So I think, of course, corporations are one way to work. It's not that everything is always invented by one party, one person, or one company. So you really try to bring together the various pieces, best of it. And I think what is crucial in this setup is that you find actually ways how to best collaborate and cooperate. It sounds easy, but it's not that easy. And just coming back a bit to what Donald and Aiga said, European company or not European company, I think there are two key factors that collaboration is key for. The first one is what you actually have to bring to the table is customers. So what all of the startups are super interested in, and all of the fintechs and the companies have customers. So if you can bring customers to the table, that's already good. And then the second thing is you need to find a way how this collaboration works. And I spent 4 years in the US in Silicon Valley, and I can give you lots of examples where some of the big companies struggle with. If you have a cool fintech and a great solution and you want to work with them, the way how it doesn't work is that you come with your, let's say, all of the lawyers, the finance people and whatever, and try to talk to them. They basically have 5 days to work on this cooperation with you, or they have to continue because they just run out of money. So you need to find interfaces and way to collaborate and cooperate with those kind of ecosystems in a way that this is feasible for them. And we see that as a big advantage to be flexible on that end. On the other side, you cannot risk your brand. I mean, if you work closely with a small fintech, they use your brand, you run into an issue with whatever data, then your reputation is gone. So it's also not that easy to do it, but I think this is key for a company to build that kind of interface to collaborate effectively and successfully.
Well, thank you, Axel. And I was just watching Albrecht, who was nodding throughout your answer. So I think, Albrecht, you're on the same page there. I mean, obviously, Visa is also, you operate in a very dynamic ecosystem, and there are new players coming along all the time. And you sort of have to align your business and maybe even cooperate. Could you tell us about that, perhaps?
Yeah, pleasure, Monica. I totally agree with what Axel just said. Is collaboration is key. The whole business model of us since over 60 years is collaboration and partnering. Be it our core products, credit or debit, which we offer our clients, the banks, be it our APIs, be it mobile payments, Apple Pay, be it artificial intelligence, data. Collaboration partnership is essential, and nobody in the ecosystem can do it alone. No big tech, no fintech. Everybody has to cooperate or wants to cooperate and draws advantages from corporations. There are merchants, banks, fintechs, PSPs. The whole ecosystem is massively complex. And the only way to develop client-oriented, consumer-oriented innovation is via partnering. And so we are destined to cooperate. And to give you one example, in the area of fintech, we have a Fintech Connect program where we support our clients to be innovative, to be customer-oriented by sustainability solutions, SME solutions, data, and so on. By bringing partners together, that is the way forward. I'm deeply convinced of.
Does this also work for you, Aiga, as a founder, and you have a B2B business model? Is partnering, is cooperation as important as for the others?
I would not agree with this necessarily. I wouldn't say that partnering is necessarily key. I do think what's much more important is really the potential to innovate and reinvent also if you're an older player. Looking back at the last year, though, or the last years, we've seen some huge opportunities that really new champions only could pick up. And I'm thinking here about the entire crypto trading, but also actually the trading apps, right? We have mainly young companies coming up and understanding what users need, how to navigate them. They provide the technology for this. I haven't seen this so much in the old players, the incumbents, who quickly could adapt and change and settle on these new business models. Another thing is like really providing digital banking experience and payments with credit components to smaller businesses, where you actually really rethink a digitalized banking experience is also something that we don't really see in the incumbent player. And then partnerships can, as we've heard before, really bring great reputation and great experience, but it can also make things quite slow, right? Because we know Allianz doesn't want to ruin their reputation because they work with any fintech that they don't really know how they're dealing with things. So this can slow you down immediately. But on the other hand, they're also a really good example of how it can work. But I wouldn't be so much focused on we're destined. This is the destiny to do partnerships. I do think that there are multiple ways to be successful.
Just one add-on, because you mentioned crypto. Just take this topic, which has really accelerated very, very quickly. And we work with crypto wallets to enable people to purchase these currencies. We enable users to cash out in fiat currencies. We support fintech partners to develop crypto offerings. So even in this new, fast developing space, we cooperate.
Yeah, I do agree that Visa is a little bit different than incumbent like big banks, though, right? Like it is true that Visa is much more focused on exactly finding these players and working with them. I haven't seen this like so much in, I don't know, if you look at Deutsche Bank or so, they were much slower in adapting to it.
Of course, Visa isn't, strictly speaking, a European company. Maybe that is why it has this different approach. You also, Aiga, referred to Allianz in that context, so I just wanted to give Axel an opportunity to respond if he wishes so.
I think it's totally fair that for bigger companies, of course, as Aiga mentioned, the threshold to collaborate is a bit higher. But on the other side, the way how we develop products, if I just look back a couple of years, how long it took to actually launch a product, the way how we internally work on products, our IT is basically 95% working in Agile. Everything is cloud, including our data. We don't have any on-premise stuff anymore. So launching a new tariff is something that is up to maximum 2 months these times. So that has really changed over the last couple of years, because we were more or less working in the same way that the fintechs do them as well. So if we go for a kind of collaboration now, we have our APIs ready that can be integrated. We also have, of course, the partnerings available. So I think also the big companies learn from the smaller ones how to become much more agile and fast.
All right, I would like to turn to Don now, because you've been listening to a lot of discussion there just now. From even in that case, Visa obviously sort of Central European region. So we're talking about European companies discussing various issues, and you've been listening from the perspective of an Asian investor. How attractive, how interesting is the European market?
But it's an interesting market, I would say. But I go back to the earlier topic. The European market is intrinsically interesting. The Italian market is not so interesting by itself. The French market is not so interesting by itself. In the same way that the Florida market in the United States is not intrinsically interesting to an outside investor, because as one of my fellow panelists said, what's important is scale access to customers. And I agree. I think it was Aiga who made the point. The regulatory framework for fintechs in particular in Europe is, I don't believe it is at all conducive to a pan-European fintech landscape. I believe that perhaps almost by design. I mean, it is very national in my own perception. And if you can't harness the scale benefits of the European market, if in every single market you have to contort your business model to adhere to a very different set of licensing and capital approaches, which I think is the reality of Europe at the moment. And that limiting factor, I think, is why you don't see a whole lot of pan-European fintechs. And I think it's also a limiting factor in terms of attracting significant interest from overseas. Not to say that we are not active in Europe. We are. I think we would be more active if there were really kind of a pan-European fintech licensing regime that enabled more European fintechs as opposed to French or German or Italian fintechs.
Okay. Actually, Don, if you have nothing else to do tomorrow or nothing better to do tomorrow, then I can suggest that you will follow the fireside chat with the CEO of FinLeap and the State Secretary of the German Ministry of Finance, because they'll discuss exactly that, the regulation issue and how conducive it is for fintechs in Germany and in Europe. So maybe there's something you can learn, or maybe you can even get involved using the chat function and ask a few questions. Maybe we can get something solved here.
Well, I should say we are big investors in FinLeap, and one of the reasons we are such big investors in FinLeap is because we saw in FinLeap the possibility to begin to address kind of European-wide opportunities in financial services technology. And you know what, as we have been there for several years, we have been in the trenches, and we've witnessed firsthand how exceptionally hard it is. And it's that experience which kind of leads me to beat this particular drum in this panel discussion.
Right. Let me jump from issues of European champions and unity and harmonized regulations and cooperation to the potential in Europe to become a leading tech hub. Aiga, I know that new tech is very important for your business model. How hopeful are you that Europe could be a leading tech hub?
I do think there's a lot of reason for optimism that Europe can become a legal tech hub, right? We have a lot of talent. We have a lot of consumers that are there. We have it's huge markets. So this is all very positive. we do have to make Europe very attractive for talent to work here. This is something where I think we're definitely behind to the US. We see that employees in Silicon Valley companies are very much used to being incentivized with like a visa or with shares and options. This again is super scattered across the EU. So if I have a company with different branches in Italy and Spain and Germany, the visa, the scheme program will be very different there. So we need to make this attractive short term through these schemes and making them standardized. I think in mid and long term, and I think it's interesting that Axel is working this in area, have to really just bring tech into education and schools as well, right? Like if I look at our developers, that first of all, way too many women, way too few women, sorry, and the women that certainly don't come from Germany. So like they usually come from Eastern Europe or from the US, but we don't have very many German women working as developers. And this is not because they're bad at it, it's just because it's just never like, it's not really a topic in education. I think we have to make this super important and show what attractive markets are there. As a company, I see how hard it is to find developers. We really need to work on the supply side of people that can work in tech.
Okay. And as you mentioned, I mean, Axel said it at the beginning himself, that they're actually bringing it into school. But Axel, what are you doing for your own company to be basically cutting edge or even ahead within your own company? What sort of position does IT and tech have there?
So it's a very good question, because it basically goes to the fundamental setup of business and IT. I think in the past, IT was much more seen as a kind of cost center that delivered according to specs. And now the way how we collaborate is super closely included and involved with the business. So you even sometimes cannot differentiate in an agile tribe who is a business person and who is an IT person. That's the first thing. That also means that the engineering culture is extremely important in the company. So it's not only that the IT people need to understand IT, it's much more and much broader than that. So if I just look at our top management, we do a lot of work with them, actually boot camps, trainings, digital literacy sessions. So I think in the boardroom, I cannot imagine a single board meeting the last 24 months where IT was not a topic. That will also be the future. If you launch something, the key question will be, yes, on the business side, but also key to understand what the capabilities are on the IT side. I mean, it comes to time to market and all of the stuff that we just discussed. It's crucial. And then you need to do a couple of fundamental things differently from my point of view. For example, that we don't have any training budgets anymore. So people want to train, they can do as much as they want. There's no limit for that. Secondly, certification is super key. I call it always, this is a bit funny, but the famous white executive white belt for cloud, for example, every executive has to go through that kind of exercise. If you want to be part of the future, you have to understand how the stuff works. That's more or less mandatory. So it's a combination of training, certification, boardroom talk, but also helping the people to make this big step and walk.
And again, Axel, I watch Albrecht, whose image is right next to you on the screen, and he keeps nodding. Did Axel just tell us how life is every day at Visa Germany, or how do you keep your company state of the art?
Well, Axel and the colleagues stressed all the right points. Let me first of all speak about Europe a bit. I think Europe rightly has all opportunities. We have a large market, we have a very high education level, and we also are very innovative. And I think at the end of the day, all business is local. There are, of course, synergies and sensible cooperations and partnerships, but I think in this diversity and innovation and competitiveness, Europe has a huge chance. And of course, IT knowledge is key, is crucial. Everything is digital nowadays and will be even more in the future. And therefore, yeah, I was nodding because I totally agree with what Axel said and also Elga.
But there's nothing wrong with agreeing with each other. It doesn't have to be controversial. I just keep an eye on the clock, and we have about 6 minutes left. And I just wanted to pick up on this whole sort of European issue, because basically that is also the title of the panel. I mean, to what extent do you think we need to have digital sovereignty, given that the markets are actually growing together? And Commissioner Gentiloni said it also, cross-border. I mean, it's nationalities alone, or to think in that context is very difficult in a global digital world. So how much digital sovereignty is actually necessary? And I'm happy to take the answer from anyone who would like to give it. I'll look at you. Who feels compelled to talk about digital sovereignty? Aiga.
Yeah, I do think, and I said it before, right? Like, if you want to be a competitor to Asia, to China, and to the US, I think it's very, very important, right, to ensure that citizens of Europe can actually keep control of their data and be innovative, and can have it under their regulatory system. I do think we need to foster pan-European champions. Maybe two direct takeaways for this would be, for me, a digital identity that works across Europe for individuals as well as companies. We'll actually create this single market that we think that we have, and we'll make it much easier for people to interact across member states. I think that's one thing that's very important. I think another thing is that we have to actually rethink in Europe is our idea around data protection. I do think the European data protection, I think, is looking a lot at disclosure instead of real transparency. I think users need to know how to use their data, but just, making companies write like 60, 70 pages of privacy policy is not helping anyone, right? Like cookie banners where you just have to accept all this. I feel like cookie banners are killing the internet. It's so unfriendly for users. Nobody's ever reading what they're accepting. And this is something where we have to really think, what are we doing here, and how are we making digitalization actually nice and a good user experience for the people in Europe.
Right. The sort of somehow bridge the need to protect consumer, as again the Commissioner mentioned earlier, but at the same time still give the digital sector room to breathe and actually make it possible for people to handle it. Definitely something I'm going to also intervene tomorrow when we have this fireside chat on regulation. I have one more buzzword for you. Again, anyone who would like to jump at it, because sustainability, of course, is a big topic, and we'll have several sessions on that as well over the next 2 days. How big a role do you think does sustainability play for the European finance sector to grow, or is it perhaps a stumbling block? Is it something that gets in the way? Who would like to tackle that?
Just a quick comment. I think it's an absolute must. And I think probably we all agree that sustainability is not only a huge obligation and a must, but also a great opportunity for Europe. Sorry, Donald. You go on.
So just also very quickly, I think you're totally right. So I think there is a huge opportunity. I mean, not many industries can shape it in the way that the financial industry can shape this kind of sustainability and sustainable finance. If you just take the example of the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance, these are currently 42 institutional investors that delivered the bold commitment to basically transition all of their investment portfolios to net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. This has reached, in the meantime, 6.6 trillion assets under management. It's just the beginning. It's already huge, but there is so much more that is, from my point of view, is going to happen on the investor side, that this will be the new normal.
Okay.
Pandemic.
Yes. Who was just saying something?
I was going to jump
Yes.
in. I guess Ping An takes sustainability and ESG exceptionally seriously, and I think we were the first Chinese institution to sign on to the UN's PRI. So it is something that we take seriously. I guess Axel, I imagine when you kind of look at Allianz's investment book and you think about all the different investments that Allianz has, if you are Ping An and you think about all of the different kinds of investments that Ping An has, and you think about the ESG implications of each of those investments, to me, fintech is oftentimes pretty far down the list of the problem areas where you'd really want to spend a lot of time thinking about how to address the sector. And that's not to say that there are no issues. I guess that when I sort of think of sustainable investing and responsible investing, I feel like there are probably a lot of other areas that are crying out for much greater global attention than fintech.
And the entire crypto sector.
I have to keep an eye on the clock, and it's ticking down fast. I have one question, and I want you to answer with one word, going back to the title of this panel, A Digital Europe, Seizing the Opportunity. If Europe does have one unique selling point, what would that be? Axel?
Data.
Albrecht?
Diversity.
Donald?
Potential scale.
Aiga?
Single market.
Thank you so much. It was a really exciting panel. Thank you so much for your time. And I hope you had a little bit of fun and hopefully some takeaway from that discussion as well. Thank you to all of you.